Welcome to WebRTC Live. In WebRTC Live, we cover the latest technical topics and business use cases for WebRTC and live video. As always, this episode is brought to you by WebRTC.Ventures, leading integrators of WebRTC video into your custom application.
All right, welcome back to WebRTC Live, and for a very special episode today, I'm your host, Arin, CEO and founder at WebRTC.Ventures. We're a custom design and development firm specializing in building live video applications. And we're here to help you take your video application live. You can learn more about us at WebRTC.Ventures. There's a couple of reasons that this is a special episode today. The first is, this is the 50th episode of WebRTC Live. That's right, confetti for everyone. If I were using a different video app, I guess I would do that as an overlay, but I'm going traditional here with actual paper and making a mess of this room. But today is the 50th episode of WebRTC Live. It was originally started as the WebRTC Standards webinar series hosted by Amir Zamora and Dan Burnett. I'm grateful for everything I've learned from watching the last all the episodes that they made of the past 49, as well as everything I've learned from the great guests that we've had since WebRTC Ventures took this over and I started hosting it. The second reason that today is a really special day is that just yesterday, January 26th, the WebRTC Standard 1.0 was officially published, released, stamped, and approved. Everything else. So we have a lot to celebrate today. To help us mark this occasion, my guest today will help us look forward to what's next in WebRTC application development. So with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Tsahi Levent-Levi, noted WebRTC industry analyst, consultant, blogger at bloggeek.me, editor of WebRTC Weekly, founder at testrtc.com. Thanks for joining us, Tsahi.
Thank you, Arin.
A little more confetti for you.
Yay, thank you. Yes, I'm the third reason I'm getting.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. The most important reason, of course. So, so let's start with the big announcement just yesterday that WebRTC 1.0 is now an official standard after so many years. Do you want to reflect a little bit on what it means to have reached this point and what does this mean for the future of live video on the internet?
So here's the thing, it means nothing. I mean,
nothing's different today than yesterday, right?
Exactly. So it's important.
Sure.
It's a very important milestone. It's good that we're here. It's good that we're moving on, and there are other things that need to be done in the standards for WebRTC. But at the end of the day, for the small person at home, the developer and the product manager, it means nothing at all. Right. Because browsers had WebRTC yesterday, they will have it tomorrow, and they couldn't care less if this got standardized today, next week, next month, next year.
Right.
Okay. And I'll say this, if people still waited because WebRTC isn't standardized, they shouldn't start now. They should go close shop and move on.
Right.
So,
yeah, exactly. I think anyone who was waiting for it to become an official standard before they tried it gave up on that notion a year ago with the pandemic, right? That was the bigger trigger to the growth in live video for sure than the standard becoming official. Still a nice milestone, and you know, there's a lot of on Twitter, a lot of congratulations and patting on the back of a lot of people who did work really hard to get it to this point. So certainly we all benefit from that. I'm grateful for that. But I agree with you. Nothing changed in our projects yesterday to today, and
I think it's not because they didn't do the work or the work that wasn't important. It's just because all of us looked behind their backs to see what they are doing. And then the browsers implemented that, and we went and coded the code alongside. So whatever is there is already being implemented to some extent.
Right, right, yeah. So there's another big announcement recently, too, around codecs. So AV1 coming out in Chrome and in Canary. So that's also been a long time coming. What does that mean?
Again, nothing. Okay. And this is why, and bear with me. First of all, it takes more CPU than VP8. And let's be realistic. People complain about the CPU that VP9 takes. They complain about the CPU that VP8 takes. And they complain that not all devices support H.264 hardware encoding. So it's just the same problem, just a bigger problem. Now, it doesn't mean that AV1 is not good for anything. There are a lot of use cases where it will be important. For the most part, for most users, in most use cases in 2021, it's going to not be even relevant. Just because it takes more CPU and it also takes time.
Yeah.
Okay. We've got VP9 for, I think, 5-6 years now in WebRTC. And they use, let's say the amount of companies using it is Google. I don't know of any other company that does use VP9 in anything that is not peer-to-peer, other than Google. They might be, and I've missed them. And then in terms of the percentage of use inside Chrome or VP9, less than 10%.
Yeah.
So that's like minuscule. And the AV1 is going to be smaller. So if you are in a leading position like Cisco that is already using that in a very small scenario inside their WebEx product, or you're Google, or you're someone in that leading position, yes, start using it yesterday, start investing the time in understanding it. If you're anyone else, no. Wait a bit.
Yeah. So, and by the way, for our viewers today, if you have any questions for Tsahi, you're welcome to put them into the chat as we talk about trends coming up here in WebRTC development, and we'll make sure that that he answers them. And so, I think you and I both have written blog posts recently about upcoming trends in WebRTC application development, and kind of looking at a couple different perspectives, technical and use cases. I thought one thing that was interesting that you said in your post at BlogGeek was about 2020 being kind of getting back to basics with WebRTC and less about some of the hyped items like augmented reality, let's say. Mm-hmm. What do you expand on that a little bit? What are we getting back to basics about?
The fact that things don't work. Okay. If you look at what browser vendors did in 2020, yes, they've added things. There is no AV1, but at the end of the day, when you try to understand what Google has put and invested the time and effort in, it was to take WebRTC and optimize that. Up until now, they thought that WebRTC is a toy. You go, you put it in a browser, it works. And the problem is that in their last Cranky Geek session that they did in November, 2 months ago, they went and said, well, we just looked at it, and when we take the data from the camera, then move it into the encoder, then to the network, then to the decoder, and then to the display, we convert the file format about 3 different times. And each time you convert a file format, there is a memory copy. Now, it's not just a memory copy of a string that is 265 characters. It's a memory copy of 1080p or 720p resolution 30 times per second. So that's going to kill I/O on the machine. Yeah. And it means that you're spending CPU for moving a chunk of data from here to here and then back. Why? Because, well, we need to change the formats. It doesn't work. So now they decided that it is time to optimize for that. Now, I came from a company that does video conferencing that was in the 1998. The thing that I was told the moment I came in is that 0 mem copy, that's important. You don't copy unless you must. Mm-hmm. And if you can, invest the time and effort to optimize so you copy a bit less, go do that. That's the most important thing. So that's like basics in video conferencing. So that's part of the going back to basics. Then there was the second part of, well, we've got a lot more use cases now. Okay. We have bigger meetings all of a sudden. We're doing meetings of 20, 30, 40, 50, 200 people. Whereas yesterday we did meetings of 2 meeting rooms or 3 meeting rooms, and that was like, too many. So it's really different. It's different in terms of what the requirements are. So yes, we all knew that to scale you need to do A, B, and C, but nobody really tried to do that, or nobody really tried to do it seriously. And those that did was ridiculed. I mean, we had a customer in TestRTC 5 years ago coming and saying, well, I want to do a fitness class. We're going to have spinning. People are going to spin from home, and they are going to be recorded or to go into a live lesson in the studio, and the teacher is going to see them all. That was 5 years ago, not in the pandemic.
Right.
Okay. And we went and we checked, and you can't put more than 16 people on a screen. You can't, because the browser doesn't let you. And then you try to rotate them and it doesn't let you. Why? Because nobody cared. And he said, but that's, the API is there. It's WebRTC. It needs to be supported. Yes, but nobody cares about your stupid use case because nobody's going to spin from home. It's 2015. Nobody does that.
We were so young and naive then, weren't we?
Yes, exactly. And now everyone is doing that.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of new use cases coming in with a lot of new requirements that needs to be met. And all the people that come in with requirements say, well, this is basics.
Yeah.
I mean, why shouldn't it work?
Yeah.
So we start seeing these bits and pieces starting to be filled. So instead of going and doing the next big shiny thing, we're dealing with, let's make sure that what we have actually works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. And it's a trend, absolutely, that we've seen in our client base as well at WebRTC.Ventures that, a few years ago, everybody who was coming to us, almost everyone who we were working with were startups and working on prototypes. And sometimes they never saw the light of day. And other times the real audience they were being presented to were investors. So, not really the public at large or certainly at scale. And that's absolutely changed the types of companies, the types of deployments that people reach out to us about over the last year, and I'm sure to you as well at TestRTC. So it's I think there's a big shift in maturity, basically, of the products, the expectations, the organizations that are applying this now. So getting it right instead of getting it flashy, I think is absolutely true.
Yes, and we talked about it, and you said that to me as well. It's like they're not looking to do the next shiny thing or to put out a nice and compelling demo. They want to put it in the hands of actual users that would use it. And there's a huge difference between the two. There are other types of features or parts of the product that you would be investing in, if that's a real user versus, well, someone that needs to say, yes, it's nice, let's put more money into it.
Yeah. So what sort of features in video apps do you see as part of your trends and things that are affected by this kind of different perspective, the different sort of use cases we're seeing over the last year?
So the first one is scaling. There were horizontal scaling of let's do more calls. That's obvious. But then there's calls needs to be a lot bigger than they used to. And in all possible parameter. The number of people that are speaking, the number of people that can be viewed at the same time, the number of people that are viewing, the whole dynamics is changing. So the number 49 became, well, the magic number of what big a size a meeting needs to be. If you can't do 49, you're not in the game. Nobody can do 49. Nobody cares. I mean, there are companies that can get there, but why? But the idea and intent is to try and bring these bigger and bigger audience sizes into these sessions. Again, because we're all stuck at home. So everything social that we're doing is done from the machine. And then, we have a family gathering. So small families is 2, 3, 4 cameras. Bigger families can be 5, 10, 20 cameras. Okay, so only for that small thing. Classes done at home. My kid is sitting all day long like that. For 5 hours, I see him like that because he's trying to stay awake in front of a class of 40 people, 40 kids. In Israel, that's the class size, just because they can't get it any bigger. And you have it elsewhere.
Yeah.
So that's like the biggest trend or the most important thing. And then I think in that, the main challenge is usually how do you optimize the solution? Because yes, WebRTC can do that, but you need to sweat it out to get there.
Right.
And after that, well, we're there. Where do we find 50 people to join our call to test it? Because we need to run a test, and well, something broke, we need to run that test again. So that becomes another challenge that, well, it wasn't there yesterday because I don't know how many people we can do in the call. We do a group call. How big? We tried with 5, it works. brought all the people from the office. It worked nice. Okay, and then it hits reality and nothing works. So that's like one of the big trends. The other one is noise. I don't know if you heard at the beginning of the session, my great neighbor upstairs again decided to renovate. He's renovating once a day now in the last 10 months. So I get this noise from time to time. I need to schedule the recordings that I do with the noise that he's making. And I'm in a closed room, so no kids usually, unless they decide to harass me. And so the whole thing of denoising becomes important now in meetings. So doing noise suppression or removing the background becomes really, really important for some reason. Well, we have kids, we have a life, but we don't want to show it because we never brought it to the office. I think, at least for me, it's a bit, I love this period of time because I see people in their homes and I see their kids and I see that they have a life. And for once I can say, well, my life comes in this door all the time. The kids, they are fine with video. They come, they look at the people I talk to from time to time. So now it's not a taboo anymore. You can do these things, and it's an approved, I don't know, it's an etiquette thing. You can do that. It's okay.
Yeah.
And now we want to remove that background again so we can be only in the office. Sometimes it's important if I want my privacy in front of the call.
Sure.
Sometimes it's less. I don't know.
Yeah. Sometimes matter of just personal choice, but there are certainly situations like in healthcare where it's important to have privacy around who else may walk in on that call or the setting that they're in. So yeah, having those sorts of features certainly become more important, especially as, like in the case of healthcare again, or those providers are working from home, perhaps.
And then you have I'll call it the newer cases of the Microsoft Teams Together mode and the application where they don't replace the background, they put you in somewhere else in a different setting. Exactly. So that's where I think the future is going, of being able to take and capture the audio and the video, process it before we send it in different ways, and not only silly hats or removal of background, but actually putting us in a different scenario with a different setup, and then decide what to do with that. And this whole processing now is coming into WebRTC in terms of how do we enable that for users. That's the whole breakup docs that is coming into WebRTC.
Right.
It's a new API.
So we'll go to scenarios where when people are back, some people in meeting are back in the conference room. Sometimes they're gonna make it look like we're all in a conference room together when we're each separately at home, or also the scenario of having people together in a conference room, but having each one of them on their own individual video panel as if they were a separate participant rather than in the same room. So
yes, but why talk about work? That's the most boring. I mean, that's the most boring use case today. Right. It is the leading one. It is what is driving the pace. But you know what? I've got a kid here. We decided at the beginning of the pandemic or just before that his Hebrew isn't that good because he's not reading. So we need to find him a private tutor. We found one. The pandemic just started, and we asked him. She lives not close by, just far. And we asked him, do you want to do this as a video call, or do we need to drive you there? He said, the video call is fine, I'm doing that for school. We never saw her. I never saw her in person.
Yeah.
I mean, I talked to her on the phone. He's the one seeing her all the time, once a week. He's probably getting better because he is getting better. And I don't think that we will go back to finding a teacher that is close by if there's a great one that we know about that is far away.
Sure.
So there are a lot of different use cases and social interactions unrelated to work that are going to stay with us and stay with us for the longer periods.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, I think there are a lot of interesting use cases there, and that kind of brings me back to a lot of this is driven by work tools, right? And you mentioned that as well, kind of how Google has driven the feature set of WebRTC in many cases with work in mind, with meetings in mind, and now the world has changed around that, and we're talking about events and hybrid events and remote dance classes and language learning and all of that. So do you see? But Google's not really getting into those things, right? They're still trying to improve Meet and use WebRTC in gaming. So do you see the feature set in Chrome or WebRTC in general? Is that a problem for it, that they're probably still primarily focused on work and the rest of us are looking at these other life use cases?
I think that it is. At some point, it is going to affect us.
Mhm.
Now, the problem is this. Let's say that we all agree that this is not a good thing. What are you going to do about it? Build your own browser? Replace WebRTC with something else? No. You can't do what Zoom did. Zoom did what they did 10 years ago without WebRTC, when everyone was fine downloading applications.
Right.
I don't think it will be that easy to put a downloadable application for dance lessons or for guitar classes.
Right.
So how do you do that? Okay, so you need to make do with what's there and to try to get the most out of it, with the understanding that you are not in control in the piece that gets in front of the eyes of your end users, which is the browser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and I suppose, though, the problem is some of those use cases, right? In the case of music, dance, you have different audio requirements, right?
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps even the way you might want to do noise suppression or audio enhancement would be very different in those use cases than for a standard meeting. So, I mean, at some point, I guess maybe you ask Google to do that, but or sort of get them on board with it, but it's still limiting, right?
Yes, the way it works today is that you can simply remove all of the audio enhancements that WebRTC does.
Mm-hmm.
Once you do that and you start looking at things like breakout box and insertable streams, but mostly breakout box, it allows you to try to do everything with WebAssembly on top of the browser or inside the browser, but to meddle with the actual media before it gets encoded.
Yeah.
So you'll start seeing more things done there. Today we do only noise suppression there, and only a minuscule part of the developers do that. Mm-hmm. We'll start seeing it more and more, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's change gears back a little bit towards, you mentioned privacy earlier in the context of changing backgrounds and stuff in our calls and that sort of thing, background replacement. What about end-to-end encryption? What do you see there? How useful is that, or do we put that on the list of overhyped items?
Overhyped. So this goes into the feature list. You need that in order to win a deal. Mm-hmm. In most cases, for most customers, you're not going to use it. Now, the reason you're not going to use it is because, well, I want the meeting to be recorded.
Right.
I want the meeting to be transcribed. I want to have automated action items listed to me. I want these things that today happen only in the cloud. They don't happen locally. So how do I exactly do end-to-end encryption without letting the service provider in the cloud do all of these nice things for me?
Right.
Until we can solve that problem, which is a lot harder than just doing the end-to-end encryption, you now have a choice in your company. Okay, Arin, it's WebRTC.Ventures. Do you want to have end-to-end encryption to your calls in the company, or do you want the calls recorded?
Right, one or the other.
Yes. So you'll see solutions where you'll need to pick and choose. So the moment you hit the record button, it will tell you, well, this isn't a private meeting anymore. You'll say, okay.
Right.
There are those that will never go and record. These would be your Europeans running Firefox. Just joking. I mean, there are definitely industries where this will be important, but there are industries that it will be the opposite. So take healthcare. Great example, HIPAA compliance, you can't record anything, blah, 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 blah. Half of the customers that I know, half of the companies in the healthcare space don't record because they can't record. The other half is recording because they must record. It's like, aren't you doing the same thing, healthcare? Okay, so even within the same industry and domain, you'll have some that will require recording, require privacy, and some that won't. Some that you will need to tell them we've got end-to-end encryption, go use that because it's important to you. If somewhere you'll say it isn't.
Right.
So yes, it is important, but let's say for most of the use cases that I see and those that come to me with different set of use cases, most of the challenges are usually in the cloud or in recorder and in sharing. It's less in adding layers of privacy on top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about testing in WebRTC? How has that changed over the last year? How do you see that changing in the coming years?
So we have more customers that test RTC.
Mm-hmm.
So more companies are testing. They are testing more. So most of our customers used to do 100, 200 browsers in a call, or not in a call, but in a meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Now they do 1,000, 2,000, and they complain that we don't do 10,000. Okay, so it's changing. The nature of things are changing. They want things yesterday. It's like you have a company, they come today and they want to test tomorrow 6,000 browsers for a large event that they have. Real story from Black Friday.
Right.
Just a month ago. Then you have a new class of customers, at least in Test RTC. We have companies that come in. If you look at their profile, they have nothing to do with communications, but they are testing vendors. They offer testing services for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Now they come to you and they say, we've got a customer, we need to test WebRTC for him. Okay, here's a platform, use it. And then they are clueless. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know, well, is jitter good or bad? What is a good number for jitter? And they start asking these questions, and you understand that there are so many different vendors today coming into this space that are just clueless about WebRTC and media communications, and they need assistance there.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And I know that you're starting to offer these testing services as well.
Yeah, we are. As part of our work at WebRTC.Ventures, as our client base has matured, as I was describing, and more production-ready applications, and more customers with same sort of scaling concerns like you were describing too.
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely more important to our customers that we're helping them with that load test type of scenario as well, and people coming to us too. And this is definitely different than a few years ago. People coming to us not with an idea for a WebRTC application, but an existing WebRTC application, and asking, how far will this take us? And can you advise us on the architecture? Is this still the right media server for us to use, or should we move to something else? So yeah, it's definitely a big change in the market there for sure. So we have a couple of questions here as well. So one is, Ricardo asks, what comes next after WebRTC? So these, now that we are actually at 1.0 officially, is it just 2.0 and 3.0 and all the minor versions from here on out, or is there something else going to replace WebRTC?
I almost fell to the trap and sent 2.0, but no, it becomes more complicated. So let's start with the easy part of streaming. Streaming was never done with WebRTC. You had HLS, MPEG Dash, everyone was happy until they understood that there's 20-second lag, and how do you do interactivity with that? You can't. And then they started moving to WebRTC, but now we've got LLHLS, low latency HLS coming in, and SRT, two other protocols that are, let's say, competing with WebRTC for doing the low latency live streaming. They are good for some, bad for others, but they're out there. So they're going to, it's the same pie, but they're going to split it between WebRTC and these protocols.
Right.
Then there's WebRTC. There is nothing coming after WebRTC, and there is nothing to replace that. And the reason is the browser. Once you have the browser, the only solution there is WebRTC. This will be true in 2021. It will start to change the following year. And that because WebRTC is going a kind of an unbundling phase. Okay. I think I wrote about it almost a year ago.
Yeah.
What happens there is that we're now starting to see initiatives like web codecs and web transport that are, let's take a transport mechanism that is real time, put it separately, let's take the codecs and give access to them directly. By using these two and WebAssembly, you can build a kind of WebRTC solution without using WebRTC. What is it good for? The dance lessons, for example. Okay, because then you own the technology and the domain. Would dance lessons be able to do that? No, because they don't have the know-how and it's not a big enough use case. Where I see this going is large companies like Zoom or Microsoft Teams will simply switch from WebRTC to these. If Google switches, then we have a problem, and they might at some point. And then I think that CPaaS vendors, if they're not looking at that and trying to invest time to understand what that means to them or where that can lead them, then they have a small problem, I think.
Interesting.
Because strategically, I would do that if I were them. If I was a CTO of a CPaaS vendor, I would go and say, this is what we're going to invest a person in or two for the next year, to understand how we are going to exploit that to do something that is differentiated.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a very interesting point. Certainly, we have more CPaaS vendors than we did a year ago. And while I think there's still plenty of space and a growing market for a wide variety of vendors there, it does make it harder for people to choose which one to go with. And obviously, in a way, I think many of them were still kind of reaching feature parity with each other. So now that they've got that, in large part, it's a matter of fragmentation of the technology you're saying, and going back to some niches there. So,
yep,
interesting. All right. One last question here, and we'll wrap up. Any advice you have for those who are still kind of jumping on to WebRTC development now? Best ways to learn about that? Books, blogs, sources, your sites?
So unfortunately, there is no book, or there are books, but they're all old.
Like right.
2, 3, 4 years ago, and if you try to use the code there or even what's written there, it's like stale. It will not run.
Right.
There are the courses on my site, WebRTCcourse.com. They are up to date. They're not cheap, but they're at least up to date, and they've got all the information that is needed. There are a few courses on Udemy and Plural site, I think. Last time I looked, they were okay.
Yeah.
Depending,
The one I had is very old at this point, and I don't think the code works.
Yes, and most of them is like, let's help you build an application, signaling here. Right. Now, go continue on your own. When I built my course, I was more into, let me explain to you what WebRTC actually means and how to think about building a whole application, the whole infrastructure, architecture, the system. Okay, not just let's put the code and do a peer-to-peer call. That was my intent, at least. So that's, if you ask me, that's the best way to learn WebRTC, by going to my courses, because I love the stuff that I do. Not really, but
keep it up to date.
Yes, I try to.
That's important, obviously. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's fit in one last question here. Looking further ahead to the future, back to flashy technology here. AR, augmented reality. At what point do we start to see that mix more with WebRTC? Do we get back to those later on?
You can do it today if you want to. It's not that easy, but it's there. So it's, if you want to go do that, you'll need to learn a lot of WebAssembly. If you want to do it in the browser, that would be, my guess is that the next frontier is for those that will be able to exploit and use WebAssembly properly. So that will be then, let's say, if you know WebRTC, that's the next skill set if you're on the front end side.
Okay. Yeah, solid advice. All right, excellent. All right, well, Tsahi, thanks so much for joining us today. Appreciate it. Always appreciate your expertise and perspective on the industry. Anywhere you want to send people today to learn more about you or WebRTC in general, or any
to Bloggeek me, my website, everything is there. If you scroll down to the end in my last post, there is a link to the workshop that I'm doing next month. It's a 3-part workshop that goes over all of these trends around WebRTC in 2021, and I'll go into the details there.
Excellent. Well, I can definitely recommend that then. All right. Well, thanks so much, Tsahi. And for all of you watching, thanks so much for joining us for the 50th episode of WebRTC Live. We'd love to hear your thoughts on content we should put in the next 50 episodes. So contact us. You can Twitter at WebRTC.Ventures is a great way to do it. Let us know what sort of topics you're interested in, things you'd like to learn about and see in future episodes or potential guests. And we'll be working on our calendar for the rest of this year. Appreciate your feedback. And this video from this session will be posted to our YouTube channel as well as to our blog at WebRTC Ventures. So thanks a lot for joining us, Tsahi. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Let's make it live.
Thanks for joining us for WebRTC Live. Visit our website at WebRTC.Ventures to learn more about our custom design and development services and to learn more about upcoming episodes of WebRTC Live.